You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Margins and Meaning accepts zero responsibility for remakes, great crowns, screw retained restorations the team called bread and butter on the way to the bench, and a problem on the way back, or any small case you stop looking twice at because the last time you got away with it. Anything I say on this show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice, and it may cause some uncomfortable reflections on a few singles you wish you could do over. Listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. I'm your host, John Wilson, and this is episode 18. I'm so glad you're here. I want to first start off this show by saying thank you for your patience. It's been a couple weeks. I've gotten a lot of little direct messages and emails asking if something went wrong because they were hungry for the next episode, and that's quite flattering. I'll tell you, I haven't been slacking off. I've just been exceptionally busy. I've been getting ready for Lab Day West, and that's in the rearview mirror now, and I'm so glad that I could be back on the microphone talking to you and sharing some thoughts that I have on this trade. You know, here's something I've been carrying for a while, and I want to say it out loud because it's the start of maybe doing something about it. You know, there's this case in our trade that we've all learned to call easy. And I don't think it's because it really is easy. I think it's just because we've seen it so many times that maybe we stopped respecting how many decisions are actually hiding inside of it. I'm talking about just a single unit implant crown. The cemented crown on a custom abutment delivered as a screw retain restoration. The case that comes through this lab and every lab in this country every week. It's the cases we call bread and butter. The quick case, the case the team picks up between arches because it feels like a break from the heavy work. And I think that's where we've been lying to ourselves. The case isn't light work, it's maybe small work with heavy consequences. And the reason I want to talk about it is not because I think single implants are a problem. I just think it's maybe where a problem is easiest to see. You know, a photo will come in from the doctor, the crown is seated, the tissue's there, bite's there, the implant's fine. Nothing went sideways, nobody's really panicking, but you see it. That crown is gray. Not catastrophically gray, not remake this case immediately gray. It's the kind of gray that makes you stare at the photo a little bit longer than you want to admit. The kind of gray that makes you go back through the case inside your head and you ask yourself where the compromise maybe started. Was it the fixture position? Was it the abutment design? Was it the wall thickness of that zirconia? Was it the material itself? Was it the cement? Or maybe it was the fact that somewhere along the way we treated this case like it was one decision when it was never one decision at all. And guys, that's really what this episode's going to be about. The case is just the example. The lesson is bigger than the case. The lesson is what happens when experience turns into a glance. When you're new to this trade and you look at everything in such deep respect and you don't know what's wrong yet, so you look twice. You look at the abutment, you look at the photo, you look at the tissue, you look at the bite. You turn the design from 3 different angles because you just don't trust your eye yet. And in not trusting in that slowness, in that second look, even when you don't fully know what you're looking at, that's really where the reps live. That's where your eye gets built. Then maybe something happens around year 5, 6, or 7. That eye just gets faster and faster. The hands get faster, and you've seen enough patterns to actually recognize what's in front of you. And guys, that's a great thing, but maybe it's just the trade rewarding you for those years you put in, but it's also one of the most dangerous moments in a technician's career because the same confidence that lets you move faster is the same confidence that tells you, hey, I've seen this case before. And the second you tell yourself that you'd already seen this case, you stop looking at the case in front of you and you start looking at the case from your memory. And those are not the same thing. They might look the same and feel the same. They might even be built out the same, but they're not the same. That difference, that little space between what you remember and what is actually sitting in front of you is where the work either keeps getting better or maybe quietly starts to slide. Some people call that burnout. I don't think that's always the right word. Sometimes it's not burnout, sometimes it's just stuck. Burnout sounds like something that just happens to you. Stuck is something you can carry to the bench every morning without maybe noticing it. Burnout asks for some rest. Stuck asks for curiosity. And curiosity is harder because it means admitting that the thing you thought you already understood might still have something to teach you. The best technicians I've ever known are not always the most talented. They're the ones who never let the reps cash in their curiosity. They stay engaged. They keep asking. They keep looking. They don't let ego break the tie when the eye and the hand are in conflict over something that they're seeing. And most of the time, they do that quietly. They don't announce that second look. They don't announce that half millimeter they fought for in the design. They don't announce the tiny change in the screw channel position that maybe kept the gray from coming through the facial. They just do it. And that's part of the mastery nobody claps for. The invisible little opportunities a technician learns to exploit without turning them into a speech. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Because the single unit implant crown has 4 or 5 of those invisible opportunities stacked inside before anything ever leaves the bench. And in this workflow, that matters even more because there's no safety net downstream. We cement the crown to the abutment in the lab, and what leaves here goes into the patient's mouth most times. There's no final chairside correction to maybe save a lazy decision. There's no second pair of eyes at delivery that deciding whether the bond line should have been handled slightly differently. What we ship is what they see. And that should make this case even heavier. In too many labs, including sometimes my own, it can make the case feel lighter because what the team sees is one slip, one crown, one box. Not those 5 decisions, not one patient, not one standard being protected or slowly negotiated away. And guys, that's the gap. And that's the gap I want to close. So let's walk you through what's actually inside this very easy case. Not in textbook order, but in the bench order. Maybe the way the case moves through the lab from the moment the file lands to the moment the box leaves. And I want you to count them with me because that's the whole argument lives in this count. Let's talk about the screw channel first. Most people understand angled screw channels as a cosmetic tool. You move that access hole off the facial, you keep it coming through that incisal edge. You get to place it where the patient and the doctor are not staring at a hole in the front of the tooth. And that's true. But guys, that's not the whole truth. In this lab, the screw channel is not just used for a cosmetic decision, it's an optical decision as well. You see, every bit of restorative material between the abutment and the outside of the crown is material that has to do masking work. It has to manage light, it has to fight the gray, it has to give the final restoration enough room to look alive instead of looking like it's losing the fight with the metal underneath it. Move the channel a fraction and the crown can actually change. That facial gets a little more room. The masking gets somewhere to work. That gray has further to travel before it announces itself. But guys, nobody outside the lab will ever know that decision was made for that reason. The patient's not going to know. The doctor may not even know. Some people on the team may not even know why it was even really mattered. But somebody at the screen has to know. That is decision 1. Decision 2 maybe is the abutment to the crown ratio. This is where the easy path starts whispering. Design the abutment to spec. Make it clean. Make it proper. Make it look like the catalog. Then move on. But this is not a catalog case. This is the case in front of you. The implant is where it is. The tissue is what it is. The material is what it is. The aesthetic demand is what it is. So the question cannot just be, is the abutment correct? The better question is the abutment helping the crown do the job it's going to have to do? That means thinking about the crown before the crown is finished. It means asking, how much restorative material are you allowing over the abutment? It means recognizing when the substrate underneath is going to fight the final shade before you ever get a chance to cement. Some cases let you improve that ratio. Some cases just don't. And that's the honest part. But the question still has to be asked, because if nobody asks it, the software will let you finish the case. The mill will still mill what it does. The case will still ship, and in the mouth, it might tell that truth later. Decision 3 maybe is the facial thickness. This is the only one that opens up after the fixture placement gives you the room. Sometimes it's not going to do it. Sometimes the surgeon put the fixture where it had to go. Sometimes the contour is boxed in. Sometimes that facial wall is going to be what it is. But when there's room, use it. Not because the software flagged the thin spot, not because the minimum thickness warning popped up, because your eye knows where the problem is going to live. That facial wall is where the masking material does the hardest work. That's where the restoration either holds the lights or lets that gray come straight through. So if the case gives you a chance to build the thickness intelligently, well, you take it. This is one of those places where the software says it's fine and my eye still tells me I know that software is wrong. The technician who's still building something listens to that second answer. Decision 4. That pre-sinter mask. We've been gifted a lot of amazing materials to do some really cool stuff. But now that we're past the design, that crown is milled, we're in the finishing stage, and this is where the material either gets some help or it doesn't. Pre-sintered masking is one of those tools the trade has available that still does not get talked about enough. You're adding the answer before the final problem shows up. You're hedging your bets. You're loading the internal surface with support that the crown will probably never, ever be noticing until you really need to notice it. And guys, that's not a random paint-by-number step. That eye knows whether the case needs help. And where it needs it, that eye is then calibrated to make the choice. Years of getting that photo back, years of learning which abutments fight the material and which ones maybe let it breathe. A new technician is not always going to be able to see that instantly. And guys, that's not an insult. It's just the truth of, putting in the reps. Some things only become visible after enough failures have taught you what to look for. That also means that the senior person in the room has a distinct responsibility. If they treat the case like a quick single, well, the team learns that this decision doesn't really matter. And it does. And the 5th is cementation. This is the one I want you to sit with, because this is the last decision before the case becomes what the doctor is going to receive. In our workflow, the crown is cemented on the abutment in-house, and it goes from 2 pieces to a single unit. And once that happens, there's one more design decision. And what's that decision? Well, you can use an opaque cement or you can use a neutral cement depending on what you need. But you don't have the benefits to mask out the internal anymore. You don't have the benefits to make the wall thickness thicker. You don't have the ability to move the channel at this last step. You're at the end. And even here, that last decision lets you ask yourself, is the cement helping us here? Just use a more opaque cement. That's the easy and simple thing, right? Well, it also can fight you along the way as well. But there's a cost, guys, because when you're using a thick layer of cement, that means that the space between the crown and the abutment is big. You have a less precise relationship between the crown and the abutment, and that less precise fit means the restoration may not live the way it should live. And I'm not interested in just solving a shade problem by creating a longevity problem. That's not craftsmanship. That's a transaction, and I don't want to make that. I'm not in this trade to justify any shortcuts just because it makes today's shade behave in the manner that I need. I'm in this trade to make the case last. That's the standard. That's the line. Everything else bends to it. So cementation has to be our final asset, not the real attempt of solving a problem. By the time you get to the cement, most of the work is already done. So count them again. Screw channel, abutment-to-crown ratio, facial thickness, pre-sintered mask, cementation. That's 5 decisions, and none of them are on the lab slip. None of them get billed out separately. None of them announce themselves when the case arrives. But all 5 live inside that one little crown the team wants to treat like a break between the real work. It's not a break. That's 5 decision case with no safety net downstream. So maybe we should start treating it like one again. So now that I've named those 5 things, I have to be careful because the version of this episode would stop at the account, right? 5 decisions, look twice, stop calling the case easy, end of show. But guys, that's not the whole truth, and I don't want to give you this tidy answer that the case does not have one. So here's the harder thing. Looking twice doesn't always fix it. Sometimes you do everything right at the bench. You move the channel as well as the case will allow. You design the abutment with intention. You build the facial thickness where you can, and you pre-sinter mask. You cement it carefully, and you do all 5 of those things. You look 5 times deeper. And the case still doesn't come out the way you wanted it to. Because the fixture was where it was. The restorative space is what we had. The tissue color was gray and was what the patient had to work with. The opposing dentition was where it was at. The case already arrived with limits already built into it. And that's where this trade lives more often than people want to admit. And anybody that tells you otherwise has not spent enough time at the bench. But there are 2 ways to respond at that moment. The first way is to say, hey, we did our best. And we mean it at the end of that conversation. But sometimes that sentence is true, but if it becomes the ending, it can also become a hiding place, right? The second way is maybe to say, hey, we did our best with what we had, and now I want to know what our best was not. Maybe better. Why didn't we make a better outcome? And maybe that's a different kind of technician at that point. That's the person who doesn't look at the limit and use it as an excuse. They use it as a map. They let the case show them where the next conversation has to happen. And most of those conversations are upstream, right? They're not at the bench. They're maybe with the surgeon before the fixture's placed. They're with the restoring doctor before the plan is locked in. They're with the patient through the doctor. So expectations are tied to the real clinical situation and not a picture on a phone. They're with the material companies when we need to know what a product can actually do, not what the brochure just makes it sound like it can do. That's where the next version of the work lives, right? And I know that's not how most cases arrive. Most labs get the case after the real estate has already been purchased, the implant is placed, and the restorative space is set. The tissue is what it is, and the lab is asked to make the impossible look routine and ship it by Friday. We have accepted that arrangement for a long time, and maybe that's what part of this work has made us feel stuck. Because if we only talk about the case after it lands at the bench, we're always fighting yesterday's decision with today's skill. Sometimes skill can save it. Sometimes skill can only make the compromise a bit more pretty. So when I say I refuse the eroding path, I don't mean I just refuse to loosen the cement space to make the gray disappear. That's an obvious version. The harder refusal is this: I refuse to let "we did our best with what we had" become the permanent answer. I refuse to stop asking how we get better inputs. I refuse to stop making the phone call because I already know the doctor might be busy, or the surgeon might not want to hear it, or the case might have already been too far down the road to change. The phone call might be the work. That question might be the work. That uncomfortable conversation before the case starts might be the difference between a technician cleaning up a compromise and a team maybe trying to prevent one. And nobody bills for that. Nobody outside the lab sees it. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make a good Instagram feed. But it's where the cases get better before the case exits the lab. And guys, there's one more thing I have to name before I close this, because every one of the decisions is being made by somebody, right? The channel, the ratio, the facial thickness, the mask, that cementation. In this lab, in your lab, these decisions are being made inside a team, and the team is always watching. You guys, they're watching your senior technicians. They watch the owners. They watch the person everyone trusts when the cases get difficult. They watch what gets slowed down and what gets rushed. They watch which cases and respect which cases get moved through like paperwork. And whether we like it or not, that's how the standard gets passed on. Not in a lecture, not in a course, not in beautifully written protocol nobody reads the second time. The standard gets passed on at the bench by what people see and what you maybe feel when the case maybe seems small. You know, if a young technician watches a senior technician glance at it a single time and then sends it through, that becomes part of their education. If they watch that same technician stop and turn the case, check a wall, maybe look at the channel, maybe understand why the shade feels a little off before it leaves the lab, that becomes part of their education as well. That's the mentorship nobody puts on the schedule. And honestly, the mentorship that I think matters most. Because the cases come and go, the patients come and go, the clients come and go. Your software changes, the materials get better. The machines you use change. What stays is the standard a technician carries into the next case. And that standard almost always shaped by what they watched somebody else do when they were still building their own eye. So when I treat a small case as small, I'm teaching someone that small cases can be treated small, and I don't want that. When I look at it twice at a case, a team thought that was easy, I'm teaching someone that the easy case is often where the standard either holds or breaks. So I refuse the shortcut on a case nobody outside the lab will ever scrutinize but me. I think I'm teaching someone that standard is not about what's being watched, but it's about who you are when nobody is watching. And the people who carry this work the longest, the technicians who are still getting better at year 40, well, they have one thing in common. They don't announce the invisible opportunities they choose to exploit. They just exploit them. A 0.5 millimeter on the screen, the mask. Nobody knew that was needed. The second look on a case that would have shipped without it. They do the work, and the work stays quiet. That's what we're teaching too, my friends. Not just the standard, but the discipline of holding it without performing it. And that's the part that has been sitting with me for some time because we talk a lot about the future of this trade. We talk about new technicians, education, software, AI, all the automation, milling, printing, all of it. But the future of the trade is also a young person standing near a bench watching what an experienced person does with just a simple, ordinary case. That's where the trade either gets handed forward or watered down. And the younger technicians listening, I want to say this carefully. You may not have the eye yet, and that's okay. None of us did. But you can build the habit before you have the eye. You can look twice, and even when you don't fully understand what you're looking for, you can ask why that crown looks gray. You can ask why that channel wasn't moved. You can ask why it maybe should have been. You can ask which cement was chosen and why. You can ask why the abutment was shaped that specific way. You can choose not to inherit casualness just because casualness is what you saw. You don't need a title to protect the standards, guys. You need attention, and that's where it starts. The reps that compound are the reps that you take when nobody asks you to take them. That's not glamorous. But it's been my entire secret. There's not really another one, guys. So let's go ahead and land this episode here and share a couple things. You know, the single unit implant crown is not the only case the trade has stopped looking twice at, guys. It's just the one I picked today because the failure mode is really easy to see. You know, that gray crown in the mouth tells the truth pretty quickly, but the pattern is bigger than the case, guys. Every lab has some category that they've quietly demoted. You know, the case you reach for before the heavy work, the one you move through and just your eye speeds through it. The one you call easy because most of the time it just behaves. It only rears its ugly head after it actually embarrasses you. You probably already know which one that is in your lab, so look at it again. Not because the case that you've seen 1,000 times tells you don't have to do it, but because you're looking at a case in front of you right now. And really look at it with the input it actually has, not with what the cases in the past have told you. Think of it as the patient who is actually going to wear this thing and think of it in their eyes. Use the decisions that are actually able to hide inside that restoration and make a difference. Count them. Lean on them. Find the places where the work has become invisible. Then ask the harder questions. Which part can I get better at this week? And which part is not really a bench problem at all, but maybe a phone call I've not made, a conversation I've avoided, or a relationship I've treated as fixed when it's actually the place where the work needs to go next. I think that's how you get unstuck. Not by pretending the work is new every day. It's not, guys. But maybe staying curious enough to admit that the case you've done 1,000 times can still expose the place where your standard might be slipping. That refusal, quiet and daily on the cases nobody is grading, is the trade. It's what separates the technician who plateaus from the technician who's still building something after 4 decades. It's that second look nobody asked for. It's that 0.5 millimeter nobody ever will thank you for. It's that decision to protect the case before the case gives you a reason to defend yourself. Guys, that's the work. That's this trade. And maybe that's the meaning underneath the margins. Protect your margins. Protect your meaning. Thank you for listening to episode 18 of Margins and Meaning. If this one landed for you, send it to one technician you work with. Not for me, but maybe for the case the two of you can look at together on Monday. This is John Wilson for Margins and Meaning, thanking you once again. And until next time, I say, take care.